Death's Gambit describes itself as a challenging 2D action platformer with deep RPG elements, but many of us would refer to it simply as a 2D Souls-like. It possesses many core elements and themes in common with Dark Souls, such as checkpoints that revive enemies when you rest, infinite lives, challenging bosses with unique mechanics, and this sort of dark tone that exists somewhere between despair, terror, and peace. That said, it also sets itself apart from other Souls-like games and stands out on its own. In terms of gameplay, it's more forgiving than Dark Souls, both with combat and character progression. In terms of lore, there are of course hints of hidden knowledge you'll need to dig deep and perform some theorizing to find, but there's also a story on the surface that is provided to you, so that you don't feel just totally lost in an unfamiliar world. You know who you are, why you're here, and what you're doing, or at least you learn it before very long. Overall, the story of the game and the various elements used to tell it do a fantastic job of making the player ponder on one of the key messages often presented in Souls-like games. Despite its allure, immortality may very well be more a curse than a blessing. In Death's Gambit, we play as Soren, an officer in the army of Vados. We've been sent on a great expedition to Cyrodiil to find and retrieve the fabled Source of Immortality. This is not the first expedition Vados has sent, nor is Vados the only country attempting to invade Cyrodiil. Cyrodiil is protected by legions of immortal beings, such as human soldiers, drake knights, bipedal wolf creatures, and a massive fire-breathing phoenix, just to name a few. Now, they aren't immortal in the sense that they cannot be killed. They are immortal in the sense that if you kill them, they'll just come back again. Despite the many expeditions sent to Cyrodiil by several countries over many, many years, none have succeeded. In fact, it's said that no one has ever reached Caer Shorai, the great castle of Cyrodiil where the source is said to reside. Soren himself wants to be a great soldier, and as his mother always said, to live a life worth remembering. But he has a more personal motivation here too. His father was called away for an expedition when he was extremely young, so he was raised by his mother Everly and was very close to her. Everly was a soldier too, however, and while Soren was still young, she too was sent to find the Source of Immortality. Naturally, that was the last Soren ever saw of her, and he's desperate to know her fate. Was she killed? Is she still alive but now kept in a prison somewhere? Did she desert the army of Vados and go to live in hiding? Despite the mission, this is what really drives Soren, and therefore us, forward in this quest. And of course, we don't make it very far. In fact, when the game starts, our expedition has already failed. All our soldiers were killed, and we just came back to life. This game saves the introduction until the cutscene you see after your first in-game death, but I'll give you the details. The army of Vados charges towards Cyrodiil, Soren bravely riding at the head of his men. The army of Cyrodiil, led by the immortal known as Endless, stands against them, and very quickly the army of Vados learns why all the other expeditions have failed. Endless, wielding a massive blade glowing with green light, warps and whirls around like some sort of trans-dimensional demonic Beyblade, reducing scores of Soren's army to bloody chunks. The Phoenix flies low, spewing flames, while the soldiers of Cyrodiil engage the soldiers of Vados head-on, with similarly disastrous results for Vados. Soren does fairly well, abandoning his horse, fleeing the Phoenix, and cutting his way through the soldiers. But then he catches Endless's attention, and after what will likely be a very quick duel, is defeated. I say likely because we are actually in control of Soren during this scene, and can actually fight Endless. Is it possible to win and change the course of events? I'll leave that to you to discover. As he dies, Soren's mind dwells on the single greatest regret of his life, the day his mother left him. Death comes for his soul, and Soren pleads for Death to keep his life. So, Death offers him a deal, complete with contracts signed in blood. The specifics of the deal aren't immediately told to us. Again, the game lets you play for a bit before burdening you with too many details. The deal, though, is this. Death wants us to defeat the Immortals of Cyrodiil, find the Source of Immortality, and destroy it. In return, Death won't ferry our soul to the afterlife, and will continuously revive us every time we die. We're kind of zombie-ish, and apparently constantly in pain, but hey, we're immortal. Armed with immortality, Soren enters Cyrodiil, and the adventure begins. What's most interesting about this contract, though, is that it has an exit clause. We can end the contract at any time. It's literally an item in the game we can choose to get rid of. If we do, Soren becomes mortal again, which introduces a permadeath mechanic to the game. If you die, the game is over and your save file is erased, so only do this if you're sure that's what you want. You'll meet quite a few people in Cyrodiil, some immortal, some not. We'll encounter some epic bosses and see the different ways that people in different parts of Cyrodiil have employed the Source to evade death. They don't all achieve the same kind of immortality in the same way, nor do they all want it. But again, I'll leave those details for you to discover. Now, let's talk gameplay. I said this was more forgiving than Dark Souls, but don't think that means it will be easy. You can die very quickly if you get careless, and enemies will pursue and strike you down with ruthless aggression. The pacing of the game is deliberate, and while I hesitate to use the word slow because it has a negative connotation, it certainly is not a fast-paced game. Combat feels very fluid, and you need to be thoughtful in how you fight. If you charge in, sword swinging mindlessly, you will die. The classic parry and counter mechanic exists, and it's certainly effective. Parrying is not the aneurysm-inducing struggle that it is in Dark Souls, but it does require practice to get the timing down. Even without parrying, your combat options are varied enough to suit any playstyle. Soren can equip 2 weapons in addition to a shield, and if you favor the bow, your quill holds 40 arrows which refill every time you rest. There are 7 classes you can play as, each with a different starting weapon and stats. The game also features a talent tree which you progress on as you defeat bosses, and while most of the talents are the same across all classes, a few are not. The primary difference in classes, aside from starting gear and stats, is how you generate soul energy. Soul energy is used to fuel your special abilities, such as the Fire Orb spell or the Assassinate Dagger skill. It's also used as ammo for some weapons you can find, and if you get a talent for it, can be used to keep firing your bow after you run out of arrows. You generate soul energy by attacking, but most classes also have an additional way to get it. The Assassin generates some when successfully dodging an attack, the Soldier class generates soul energy by blocking, and so on. The exceptions are the Blood Knight and Acolyte of Death, which don't get a starting talent for generating more soul energy. Instead, Blood Knights can regain health that was recently lost by dealing damage, kinda like in Bloodborne, and Acolytes can rebuild and use death statues in the game that were destroyed, which means they get more checkpoints than other classes. Any class can equip any weapon if they meet the stat requirement, and there is a mechanic for reallocating your stat points, but you can only use it twice. Killing enemies gains you shards, which serves both to level you up at death statues and is used as currency for items and abilities. Phoenix plumes are the primary method of healing. They can be used multiple times, can have their number of uses increased by finding the right upgrade items, and replenish themselves every time you rest. There are actually different types of plumes we can find and equip. Some heal more health, some we can use more quickly, some have additional effects such as damage reduction or removing poison. No matter which plume we have equipped, the number of uses doesn't change, though you can choose to decrease the number of uses you have to make each use stronger. Soren's stats are pretty straightforward and easy to understand, so you can level up with confidence. Now, here's where things get very different from Dark Souls. When you die, you don't drop your shards. Instead, you drop a plume, decreasing the number of times you can heal between checkpoints until you retrieve it. If you die again before retrieving the plume you dropped, then you just drop another one. The old one doesn't go away, it still stays where it was the first time you died. And you can also pay shards to recover all your lost plumes at the death statues if you're unable or unwilling to retrieve them. Maybe you drop them fighting a boss and don't want to go to fight that boss again right now, but you don't want to leave your plumes sitting in their room until you do feel like fighting them again. The boss battles in this game are, in my opinion, extremely fun and challenging without being unfair. When I was killed by a boss, I almost always felt like I deserved it because I made some mistakes, and I kept learning and improving when I came back to fight them again. I love Dark Souls, but let's be honest, sometimes the boss fights can be pretty unfair and pretty unfun. They often boil down to figuring out how to stand behind a boss and keep cutting at their ankles until they die. That doesn't happen in Death's Gambit. Also, nearly every boss has 2 tomes hidden somewhere in the area leading up to them for you to find. Not only do they give you a bit of lore for the boss you're about to fight, but they each will increase the damage you deal to the boss by 5%, so they're worth finding. After you defeat a boss, you can choose to challenge him to a heroic rematch, which allows you to fight an even more difficult version of the boss, with new attacks and higher stats. There are secret areas and treasures to find, and each area feels unique while still keeping to the theme of the game, which, given some of the areas you find in this game, is very impressive, I promise you. The music of the game is beautiful and sets the tone perfectly. In fact, the music I'm using for this video is from the title screen for the game, and as soon as I heard it, I immediately fell in love with this game, and that feeling never faded. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to offer some advice for getting off to a good start with this game. First of all, you want to invest in stamina and haste early on. You'll quickly realize that your stamina depletes very quickly, which is one reason combat is the more deliberate, thoughtful challenge that it is. To make sure you can fight effectively, you want to not only increase your stamina pool, but your haste as well, since haste is a stat which determines how quickly your stamina recovers, and it also affects ability cooldown. Next, once you find the NPC which allows you to upgrade your equipment, you may be hesitant to upgrade your primary weapon, for fear of finding a better weapon later. I would suggest not to worry about that too much. There aren't many primary weapons in this game to find, and you can always get more soul stones to upgrade them if you do decide to switch. Immortalite stones, which are used to upgrade your equipment beyond +5, are more rare, but my point is, don't worry about upgrading the wrong gear early on. Even if you change your mind later, you won't have lost very much. In terms of defensive equipment, you can find and equip different helmets and footwear, as well as auras and capes which function as accessories. These you'll find a wide variety of, and yes, that charm you can choose as your starting gift is a shield, which requires strength to equip, so I don't recommend choosing it unless you're going with a strength build. Speaking of your starting gifts, seasoned Dark Souls players will likely notice the Rusty Charm right off the bat, and remember the pendant, which essentially has no real use. I'll go ahead and tell you now, the Rusty Charm does not unlock any unique plot points, dialogue, or secret areas. Is it useless? Well, not entirely. It does help you just a little bit, but the effect it has will likely go completely unnoticed. In closing, Death's Gambit is a beautifully crafted, incredibly fun game with challenge enough to keep you engaged and coming back for more after defeat. It's more forgiving and accessible than Dark Souls, with game mechanics that don't punish you quite so badly for dying or investing in the wrong stat or weapon, boss mechanics that are more engaging and fun than stay behind them and dodge everything, and a character, plot, and goal that is presented to you directly instead of being hidden in item descriptions. That said, there is plenty of mystery here, with item descriptions, dialogue, and boss fights that hint at a great deal more going on than what we see on the surface, and also gives us glimpses at the history of this world. There's an expansion being built right now that will not only add more content, but will reportedly bring some massive changes to the game, and might make much of the gameplay advice in this video obsolete. But if that does happen, I'll just have to make an updated version. I tried to avoid spoilers here, but I've got some theories about the events and characters you meet later that I may discuss in future videos. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it did a good job introducing you to the world of Death's Gambit. Thanks for watching, folks. Until next time.